The smoke hung thick in Murphy's cantina, swirling around the dim lights that cast long shadows across scarred metal tables. On Nexus Station, this was the kind of place where questions weren't asked and stories were traded like currency. Air buzzed with a dozen different alien languages mixing together like some cosmic soup in the far corner. Hunched over a glass of something blue and glowing, sat Vexel. Most folks gave the old Krillian a wide berth. Hard not to when you looked like him. 6 cybernetic arms moved with mechanical precision as he lifted his drink. Each one a replacement for limbs lost in battles most beings couldn't even imagine. His face told an even grimmer story. Plasma burns had melted half his features into twisted metal and scarred flesh. And where his left optical cluster should have been was just empty socket filled with crude sensor equipment. The cantina's usual crowd was there tonight. A group of Zilani traders arguing over shipping routes near the bar. Some off-duty mining crew from the asteroid belts, their environmental suits still dusty from their shift. A couple of Thracian smugglers playing cards in the back, their scaled hands moving chips around like they were planning their next heist, but it was the table near the center that was causing all the noise. 3 young Terran recruits, fresh out of training by the look of their pristine uniforms, were holding court with some older mercenaries. The kind of kids who thought they knew everything about war from their simulation training. "I'm telling you," Deho was saying, his voice carrying that special kind of arrogance that only came with youth and ignorance. "Humans aren't that special. Sure, we've won some battles, but so has every other species when they're desperate enough. All species fight when they're cornered." His 2 buddies nodded along, probably thinking they were impressing the scarred veteran sitting across from them. One of the mercs, a grizzled Corvin with more scars than smooth skin, just shook his head and went back to his drink. "Earth Military Academy teaches the same tactics everyone else uses," Deho continued, warming up to his subject. "Formation fighting, overwhelming firepower, secure supply lines. Nothing revolutionary about it." That's when the cantina started to go quiet, not all at once, but like a wave spreading out from Vexil's corner. The old Krillian had stopped drinking and was now staring at the young human with an intensity that made the air feel electric. "Kid's got some opinions," muttered the Corvin merc, glancing nervously toward Vexil's table. "Maybe someone should tell him to keep his voice down," whispered one of the Thracians. Their cards forgotten. But Deho was too caught up in his own speech to notice the change in atmosphere. I mean, what makes human tactics so special? We bleed just like everyone else. We die just like everyone else. All this mythology about human warriors is just propaganda to make the enemy think twice. The cantina was dead silent now. The background hum of the station's life support seemed to quiet down. Every eye, optical sensor, and compound lens was focused on either the young recruit or the corner where Vexel sat like some mechanical spider waiting to strike. Slowly, very slowly, the old veteran began to move. His cybernetic limbs whirred softly as he pushed himself up from his chair, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. When he turned toward the center of the cantina, the full extent of his injuries became visible. Plasma burns covered most of his torso, and his left arm was completely mechanical from the shoulder down. Kid Vexel's voice came out as a rasp, filtered through a damaged translator that gave his words an electronic edge. Each syllable seemed to scrape against the air like metal on stone. "In my 300 years of life, I've fought in 17 different conflicts across 4 galaxies." Deho finally noticed the attention he was getting. His confident smile faltered as he took in the sight of the battle-scarred alien moving toward him with deliberate, predatory steps. "I've seen species that could regenerate lost limbs in minutes," Vexel continued, his remaining optical sensors fixed on the young human. "I've fought alongside warriors who could survive in the vacuum of space with nothing but their natural armor. I've watched entire fleets get torn apart by creatures so alien that most beings can't even look at them without going insane." The old veteran stopped just a few feet from Deho's table. Up close, the human could see the intricate scars that crisscrossed the Krillian's face, each one telling a story of survival against impossible odds. But in all those battles, across all those worlds, only 3 conflicts still give me nightmares. Only 3 battles make me wake up screaming in the middle of the sleep cycle. Vexel leaned forward, his mechanical arms bracing against the table. Want to know what they all had in common? Deho's throat worked as he tried to swallow. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. What? He managed to whisper. Vexel's optical sensors blazed with an unsettling red glow. Humans. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the cantina, other veterans were nodding slowly, their own memories stirring in the darkness. Behind their eyes, "Sit down, boy," Vexel said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the authority of someone who had seen the very worst the galaxy had to offer. "Let me tell you why your species terrifies every veteran in this cantina." Vexthiel settled into his chair, his cybernetic limbs creating small worry sounds as they adjusted. The cantina remained deadly quiet, every being hanging on his words. Even the usual background chatter from the bar had stopped completely. First story happened during the Hive Wars, Vextel began, his damaged voice carrying easily across the room. This was maybe 50 years ago when the galaxy was still trying. To figure out how to fight those things, I was attached to the 7th Galactic Defense Fleet as a tactical advisor. Young and stupid back then, thought I knew everything about warfare. He took a long drink from his glowing blue liquid, the mechanical parts of his throat clicking as he swallowed. We got the distress call from Kepler 44 to be around 0300 station time. Human colony world, 12 million souls, under siege by a full Hive armada. For those of you too young to remember, the Hive wasn't like any enemy we'd faced before. A young Zalani trader near the bar spoke up nervously. What made them so dangerous? Vexed the less. Optical sensors turned toward him. They were alive. Their ships, their weapons, their armor, everything was grown, not built. Bioships that could heal themselves, reproduce by splitting like cells, and adapt to whatever you threw at them. Kill one, and 2 more would grow from the wreckage within hours. The old veteran's voice grew darker. By the time we arrived at Kepler 4 for 2B, the orbital defenses were gone. 3 massive biocruisers, each one the size of a city, were hovering over the planet like giant parasites. Smaller attack vessels were swarming down to the surface, and we could see the cities burning. From space, Deho leaned forward despite himself. "How many ships did the Hive have?" "Over 200 confirmed contacts," Vexel replied. "Our fleet had maybe 30 vessels. Standard protocol was immediate evacuation of all civilians, hit-and-run tactics. To buy time for the transport ships to get as many people off-world as possible. But when Admiral Korthok opened communications with the planetary government, something unexpected happened." He paused, his mechanical fingers drumming against the table. The human commander, a woman named Yunji, refused to abandon the planet. I was on the bridge when that transmission came through. She was maybe 40 years old, wearing a torn military uniform, half her face covered in blood from some explosion. Behind her, we could see smoke and flames through the command center windows. Vexel's voice took on a different tone, almost mimicking the human woman's cadence. "Admiral, we appreciate the rescue fleet, but we're not leaving. This is our home. Our children are buried in this soil. Our grandparents built these cities with their own hands. If the Hive wants Kepler 4 for to be, they're going to have to take it over our dead bodies." A murmur ran through the cantina. Most species would consider such a response either heroic or insane, depending on your perspective. "What happened next still gives me nightmares," Vexel continued. "We offered to send down ground forces, but Yonji told us to stay in orbit and focus on the space battle, so that they had the surface covered. Then they started doing something that made every tactical expert in our fleet question their sanity." He gestured with 2 of his cybernetic arms, creating shapes in the air. They started demolishing their own cities. It's not random destruction, but carefully planned demolition. Skyscrapers were brought down across major streets to create kill zones, where Hive ground forces would have to funnel through. They flooded entire districts by blowing up dam systems, creating impassable moats filled with electrified water. The Korvan mercenary shook his head in disbelief. They destroyed their own infrastructure. "That was just the beginning," Vexel said grimly. "Hospitals became fortress bunkers with medical staff operating plasma cannons between surgeries. Schools were turned into ammunition factories with teachers and students working around the clock to produce explosives. Every civilian with working hands was given a weapon and a position. His optical sensors dimmed as he remembered, monitoring their communications from orbit. Heard a conversation between Yunji and her logistics officer, a man named Jin Woo. He was reporting that they were running low on military-grade weapons. You know what her response was? Then we improvise. Kitchen knives, farming tools, homemade bombs, everything becomes a weapon. A Zalani officer who had been listening intently leaned forward. Civilians actually fighting. Vextel's laugh was bitter and sharp. Fighting? No, they weren't just fighting. They were winning. I watched through our long-range scanners as a human child. Couldn't have been more than 16 years old. Named Haiyan Wu, manually guided anti-ship missiles into Hive biocruisers while his position was being completely overrun. The cantina was dead silent now. Even the background hum of the station's systems seemed to fade away. This kid was on top of a collapsed apartment building, using a jury-rigged targeting system made from spare parts. Hive ground forces were swarming up the debris pile toward him. I could see the biosoldiers getting closer with each passing minute. These things looked like giant insects crossed with armored vehicles, each one capable of tearing through steel with their bare claws. Vextel paused, his voice becoming softer, but somehow more intense. Haiyan Wu stayed at his post, guided 3 separate missiles into the heart of those biocruisers while the Hive soldiers were literally climbing over each other to reach him. The explosions from those capital ships lit up half the planet. He died at his targeting console, but he took 3 ships and maybe 10,000 Hive soldiers with him. The old veteran took another drink, his mechanical throat clicking again. The siege lasted 8 months. 8 months of watching humans do things that no sane species would attempt. They turned their own planet into a death trap, used their cities as weapons, and fought with a desperation that bordered on madness. He looked around the cantina, meeting the eyes of every being present. By the end, there were maybe 2 million humans left alive out of 12 million. The planet's surface was completely ruined, cities in rubble, forests burned, oceans polluted, but the Hive fleet gone, completely destroyed. Every single bioship reduced to floating debris. Daeho found his voice. How did they manage that with so few people? They turned survival into an art form, Vextel replied. Every death had a purpose. Every sacrifice took multiple enemies with it. They fought like they had nothing left, to lose because they truly didn't. The old veteran's optical sensors fixed on Daeho again. And do you know what Commander Yunji said when we finally made planetfall to assess the damage? After 8 months of hell, after losing 10 million of her people, after turning her beautiful world into a graveyard, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She apologized for the mess. The cantina remained deathly quiet as Vexel's first story settled into everyone's minds like a heavy weight. The old veteran flexed his cybernetic fingers, servos, worry softly as he prepared to continue. Several beings had moved closer to hear better, forming a loose circle around his table. Second story happened about 30 years ago, Vextel continued, his voice taking on a different tone. I was serving aboard the dreadnought Eternal Vigilance as part of a patrol fleet in the Helix Nebula sector. Beautiful place, if you've never been there. Purple and gold gas clouds swirling around a neutron star, creating this light show that could take your breath away. He gestured with 2 of his cybernetic arms, painting pictures in the air. But beauty can be deadly out there. The gravitational fields around that neutron star were so intense they could crush a ship like an empty can if you got too close. Navigation computers would go crazy trying to plot safe courses through all that stellar interference. Narration. Smuggler near the back called out. Heard the Calroth used to use that sector as a hunting ground. Vextel's optical sensors turned toward him. Smart man. The Calroth raiders had been using the nebula as their base of operations for months. It's a nasty bunch. Imagine wolves crossed with machines, each one standing about 8 feet tall with razor-sharp claws and powered armor that could shrug off most standard weapons. They'd been hitting cargo convoys, slave raids, that sort of thing. The old veteran took a sip of his drink, the blue liquid glowing brighter as it passed through his damaged throat. We were doing a routine patrol sweep when our sensors picked up weapon signatures deep in the nebula. Multiple ships in combat, energy readings off the charts. Captain ordered us to investigate. He paused, his mechanical fingers drumming against the table. What we found was a running battle. 3 human ships being chased by what looked like the entire Calrath Raider fleet. The humans were in bad shape. Their flagship Soul's Pride was venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. Sparks flying from damaged systems. Our escort destroyers were limping along on backup power, their main engines flickering like dying stars. Deho leaned forward, caught up in the story despite himself. How many Kaloth ships were there? 17 confirmed contacts, Vexler replied. Fast attack cruisers, all of them designed for hit-and-run tactics. Humans were outnumbered. 5-1, outgunned and deep in enemy territory. Any sane commander would have either surrendered or tried to break away to open space where they might have a chance. A Zalani trader shook his head. No way to win a fight like that. What we thought too, Vexel said grimly. We were moving to assist when the human commander opened communications. Captain Jamin, maybe 50 years old, his uniform torn and bloody. Behind him I could see sparks flying from damaged control panels, crew members working frantically. To keep systems online, the old veteran's voice took on the cadence of the human captain. Galactic vessel, this is Captain Jamin of the Soul's Pride. We're about to attempt something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Recommend you maintain safe distance. Prepare to collect our flight data recorders for the record. A murmur ran through the cantina. Several beings exchanged worried glances. But they didn't surrender, whispered the Thracian pilot who had been listening intently. Vexiel's laugh was sharp and bitter. Oh, they fled all right. But not away from the danger, straight toward it. Jamin ordered his ships to dive deeper into the nebula, heading directly for the neutron star's gravity. Well, our tactical officer thought their navigation systems had been damaged, that they were flying blind. He gestured with his arms again, showing the motion of the ships. The Calrath followed them in, thinking they had the humans trapped. But as we watched on our long-range sensors, something incredible happened. The human ships began using the gravitational distortion as a weapon. The cantina was silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems. They fired their engines at full burn, using the neutron star's gravity to accelerate beyond what their ships were designed for. Cruise, but somehow they held together. Vextel's optical sensors dimmed as he remembered. The engineering officer aboard the Soul's Pride, a woman named So Young, was working miracles. She was manually overriding safety systems, pushing the reactors beyond their limits, turning their own ships into kinetic missiles. I could hear her on the open channel, calling out power levels and course corrections, even as her voice was being distorted by the massive acceleration. A young Corvin mechanic spoke up nervously. I would tear a ship apart. It did, Vexel replied, but not before they completed their attack run. The first destroyer, piloted by a helmsman called Dong Hayan, came screaming out of the gravity. Well, at near-light speed, Kalarth flagship didn't even have time to react before that destroyer punched through its armored hull like it was made of tissue paper. The old veteran paused, his voice becoming softer but somehow more intense. The explosion lit up the entire nebula. One moment there was a massive Calroth cruiser. The next there was just expanding plasma and debris. But Dong Hayan's ship was gone too, completely vaporized by the impact. He took another drink, his mechanical throat clicking. The second destroyer followed the same trajectory, piloted by a young woman named Hei Wan. She took out 2 more Kalau. Vessels before her ship broke apart from the stress. The third destroyer, commanded by someone called Minho, managed to destroy 3 enemy ships before his reactor finally gave out. Deho found his voice, but their own ships. Gone. All of them, Vextel confirmed.
Oh.
But they took the entire Raider fleet with them. 17 Calrath vessels destroyed by 3 human ships running on fumes with skeleton crews. The mathematical impossibility of it still makes our tactical. Computers crash when we run the simulations. The cantina was dead silent. Even the background sounds from the bar had stopped. Saw Young was the last one to die, Vexto continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Her ship was the flagship, built to last longer than the escorts. As her vessel finally broke apart from the gravitational stress, she managed to get one final transmission out. He looked around the cantina, meeting the eyes of every being present. We recorded everything, kept it in our files for years. Want to know what her last words were? As her ship was literally tearing itself apart around her, as she was dying in the cold vacuum of space. The old veteran leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely audible. Tell our families we held the line. The silence that followed was absolute. Several beings stared at their drinks, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Others just sat in stunned contemplation of what they had just heard. 17 enemy ships, Vextel repeated. Destroyed by 3 humans with damaged vessels and pure determination. The Calruth never used the Helix Nebula as a base again. They considered it cursed ground after that day. He sat back in his chair, his cybernetic limbs adjusting with soft, mechanical sounds. And that's just the second story. Want to know what really scares me about humans? It wasn't even the worst thing I've seen them do. The temperature in the cantina seemed to drop several degrees as Vexel prepared for his final tale. His cybernetic limbs moved restlessly, creating small mechanical sounds that echoed in the absolute silence. Several beings had ordered stronger drinks as if preparing themselves for what was coming. The third story is why I drink, Vexel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It's why I wake up screaming some nights, why I can't look at human soldiers the same way anymore. Titan Moon Campaign, about 20 years ago. Ground assault against entrenched Vorthon positions. He paused, staring into his glass as if searching for answers in the blue liquid. Back then I was still doing field work. Combat medic, attached to the 43rd Assault Division. Mixed unit humans, Zelani, Corvin, even a few Thracians. But it was the humans who volunteered for the worst assignments. A nervous Solani trader shifted in his seat. What made Titan Moon so bad? Vextel's optical sensors fixed on him? The Vorthons had been fortifying that rock for over a decade. Imagine creatures that look like armored bears crossed with tanks, each one standing 9 feet tall and built like living weapons. They don't feel pain the way most species do, and they regenerate from wounds that would kill anything else. The old veteran's voice grew darker. Their bunker complex was carved into the moon's core. Tunnels that went down for miles, automated defense systems, energy shields that could stop orbital bombardment. Intelligence said it would take months of siege warfare to crack it open. He took a long drink, his mechanical throat working noisily. The humans volunteered to lead the ground assault, said they could take it in 48 hours. Species commanders thought they were insane. The Vorthons had killed 3 previous assault forces without losing a single position. A Corvin mercenary leaned forward. Ow! How many troops did they have? 2,000 Marines, Vexel replied. Against an estimated 8,000 entrenched defenders with superior firepower. The first thing you need to understand about human infantry is that they don't know when to quit. They don't understand the concept of acceptable losses. The cantina was deathly quiet now, everyone hanging on his words. I was attached to Alpha Company, carrying my medical kit and trying to keep up with their assault teams. The first wave hit the outer defenses at 0600 hours. Vorthon plasma cannons opened up immediately, cutting down the first rank of Marines like they were made of paper. Vexel's voice became strained. That's when I saw something that still haunts me. Sergeant Taeyong took a direct hit from a plasma cannon. The beam burned completely through his combat armor, cooked half his torso. I could see his ribs through the melted metal and flesh. He should have been dead instantly. The old veteran's cybernetic fingers clenched around his glass. You know what he did? He grabbed his own plasma rifle, set it to maximum power, and used the barrel to cauterize his own wound. The smell of burning flesh filled the air as he basically welded himself back together. A bartender dropped a glass somewhere in the back, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. But he didn't stop there, Vexel continued. He kept fighting. For 6 hours, led his squad through 3 separate defensive positions. while literally holding his internal organs in place with his offhand. I watched him direct fire missions while his own blood was pooling at his feet. The Thracian pilot who had been listening made a sound of disbelief. "That's not possible. I have the medical recordings," Vexel said grimly. "His vital signs should have flatlined within minutes. Instead, he kept going through pure willpower. Every time I tried to evacuate him, he'd wave me off and point toward the next objective." He paused, his optical sensors dimming as he remembered. By hour 4, I wasn't even sure what was keeping him alive. Zarmer's medical systems had shut down from the damage. Half his squad was dead or wounded, but he kept pushing forward, calling out tactical instructions, even as his voice got weaker. A young Zalani engineer spoke up nervously. "What happened to him?" "Finally collapsed when they took the third bunker," Vexel replied. "Just fell over like someone had cut his strings." But even then, even as I was trying to stabilize him for medical transport, he kept asking about his men. "Doc, did we get them all? Are the boys okay?" Those were his last conscious words. The cantina was silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems. But that wasn't the worst part, Vexel continued, his voice cracking slightly. The worst part was when they reached the final bunker complex. The Vorthans had retreated to their command center, a massive fortress built into the moon's core. Tunnels leading down for miles, automated defenses, the works. He took another drink, his mechanical parts clicking as he swallowed. The assault teams were pinned down at the entrance. Plasma fire, explosive charges, everything the Vorthons had left. The humans needed someone to get into the ventilation system and take out the defense grid from the inside. Vexel's voice became softer, more haunted. A private named Hygen volunteered. Sweet kid, barely 19 years old, had joined up to pay for her family's medical bills back on Earth. Always carried pictures of her little sister in her helmet. Old veteran's optical sensors began to dim. She strapped herself with every explosive charge the squad had left. Plasma grenades, thermal detonators, even some jury-rigged reactor cores. Turned herself into a walking bomb. A murmur of unease ran through the cantina. Several beings shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I was monitoring her vitals on my medical scanner as she crawled through those tunnels, Vexel continued. Miles of narrow passages, automated gun turrets, poison gas dispensers. Any normal person would have been dead from fear alone. He paused, staring at nothing. But her heart rate stayed steady. Even as she armed the charges, even as she knew she wasn't coming back out. Her last transmission came through just before. The explosion. The silence was absolute now. Even the background noise from the station seemed to fade away. "See you on the other side, boys," Vexel whispered. That's what she said. Then the entire command structure disappeared in a fireball that lit up half the moon. The explosion was so massive it registered on seismic sensors 3 systems away. He sat back in his chair, his cybernetic limbs making soft worry sounds. The Vorthon resistance collapsed after that. 8,000 defenders reduced to scattered survivors in less than 2 days. But the cost... Vexel's voice trailed off. By the time we secured the position, 30% of the human force was dead or wounded. 30%. In any other military, that would be considered a catastrophic defeat. But the humans had accomplished their mission. Deho found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. How did they manage it? Vexel's optical sensors fixed on the young recruit. I asked their colonel the same question. Man named Wu Jin, maybe 40 years old. Had been fighting for 20 years, had scars on his scars. When I found him after the battle, he was sitting, alone in what used to be the Vorthon command center, just staring at the list of casualties. The old veteran's voice became flat, emotionless. "Colonel, how did your people do it?" I asked him. "How do you fight like that, knowing the cost?" He looked at me with those dead human eyes, eyes that had seen too much war, too much death. Still leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely audible. "We do what needs doing, Doc," he said. "That's what humans do. We do what needs doing, no matter the cost." The cantina remained silent for long moments after he finished speaking. The weight. of the story settled over everyone like a heavy blanket, making the air feel thick and oppressive. Several beings stared at their drinks, unable to meet anyone's eyes. That's when I knew, Vextel said finally. That's when I understood why every veteran in the galaxy has the same look in their eyes when they talk about fighting alongside. Humans, it's not admiration, it's not respect, it's fear. He looked around the cantina, meeting the gaze of every being present. Fear of what you might become when you're around them long enough. Fear of what you might be willing to sacrifice when the stakes are high enough. Fear of what doing what needs doing really means. Vextel finished his drink and stared at the empty glass, his cybernetic fingers tracing the rim with mechanical precision. The blue liquid had left a faint glow on his lips, making his scarred face look even more haunting in the dim cantina light. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive, as if his words had sucked all the air out of the room. You want to know the real horror of fighting alongside humans? He said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not their tactics. It's not their weapons or their ships or their ability to turn anything into a weapon. It's how they change you. He looked around the cantina at the other alien veterans scattered throughout the room. The old Corvan mercenary was nodding slowly, his scarred hands wrapped around his drink. The Thracian pilot near the wall had gone pale, her scales shifting. Color as memory surfaced. Even the bartender, a massive Zalani with arms like tree trunks, was staring into the distance with haunted eyes. All of you know what I'm talking about, Vexel continued, addressing the room. Every veteran who served with humans has that same look. We've all been changed by what we've seen. A grizzled Montari soldier near the back spoke up, his voice rough from years of breathing recycled ship air. After the Proxima campaign, I couldn't look at my own reflection for months. Kept seeing what I'd done, what I'd become. Vextel nodded grimly. After Titan Moon, I couldn't sleep. 3 months of staring at the ceiling of my quarters, replaying everything in my head. Kept thinking about Haijin crawling through those tunnels, knowing she wasn't coming back. About Taeyang holding himself together through pure willpower, leading his men even as he was literally falling apart. His optical sensors dimmed as he continued. But it wasn't just them. It was all of them, really. Every human soldier I served had that same quality. They could look death in the face and keep moving forward. Not because they weren't afraid, but because something inside them was stronger than the fear. A young Zalani engineer who had been listening quietly spoke up. What happened after the campaign? Did anyone try to stop them? Vextel Slaff was bitter. The Galactic Council tried to court-martial some of the human commanders for what they called extreme measures, called their tactics inhumane, said they violated the rules of civilized warfare. There were investigations, tribunals, the whole bureaucratic circus. He gestured with 2 of his cybernetic arms. But how do you prosecute someone for winning? How do you condemn tactics that save lives in the long run? The humans had accomplished, in 48 hours, what 3 other species couldn't do in 6 months. They'd broken an enemy that everyone else considered unbeatable. The Corvan mercenary spoke up. I heard Admiral Chen testified at those hearings, Minjae Vextel corrected. Admiral Minjae Chen. She was the overall commander for the Titan Moon operation. I was there when she gave her testimony. Room full of politicians and military brass from a dozen different species, all trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. His voice took on a different tone, mimicking the human admiral's cadence. Honorable council members, you ask me to justify our methods. You want me to explain why we fight the way we do? The answer is simple. We fight to win because the alternative is unacceptable. When the enemy threatens our families, our homes, our way of life, we don't hold back. We can't afford to. The cantina was silent except for the soft hum of life, support systems, and the distant sound of ships docking at the station. The tribunal dragged on for weeks. Vextel continued. Witness after witness, trying to make sense of human tactics. But in the end, they couldn't condemn success. The Vorthon supremacy had been broken. Thousands of worlds were free from their oppression. How do you argue with results like that? Deho, who had been sitting quietly through the entire tale, finally found his voice. Sir, if it's so traumatic, If it changes everyone who serves with them, why do you still work with human forces? Vexel's optical sensors fixed on the young recruit, and for a moment his expression almost looked sad. Because, kid, I've seen what happens to their enemies. And I've learned something that every veteran in this cantina knows. There are only two sides when humans go to war. You're either with them or you're in their way. He stood slowly, his cybernetic limbs worry as they adjusted to support his weight. The Hive Empire, extinct, completely wiped out after Kepler 440b. They tried to adapt, tried to evolve countermeasures to human tactics. Didn't matter, the humans just evolved faster. A murmur ran through the cantina as beings shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Calroth Raiders, like to the Rimworlds like cosmic dust after Helix Nebula. They used to be the most feared pirates in 3 sectors. Now they'd run courier services and cargo transport, too broken to even think about raiding again. Vextel's voice grew darker. The Vorthan supremacy. They sued for peace 6 hours after the Titan moon footage reached their homeworld. 6 hours. These were beings who had never retreated from a battle in their entire history, and they surrendered. Without firing another shot, he moved toward the cantina entrance, his mechanical limbs creating soft clicking sounds on the metal floor. You see, humans don't just fight wars, boy. They end them, permanently. They don't leave loose ends or unfinished business. When they decide something needs to stop existing, it stops existing. The old veteran paused at the door, his silhouette framed against the corridor lights beyond. I've served with 17 different species across 4 galaxies. Fought alongside warriors who could regenerate from fatal wounds, commanded troops who could survive in vacuum, worked with beings who could phase through solid matter. He looked back at Deho one final time, his optical sensors glowing with an unsettling intensity. But only one species scares me. Only one species makes me wake up in cold sweats, wondering if I'm becoming something I don't recognize. And the only thing scarier than being their ally, ... Why he paused, letting the words hang in the air as being their enemy. The door hissed shut behind him, leaving the cantina in stunned silence. The sound of his cybernetic limbs faded as he disappeared into the station's corridors. But his words lingered like smoke in the air. Deho stared at his hands, suddenly, understanding why the other veterans in the cantina looked at him with such knowing sadness. They had seen the future, had glimpsed what humanity could become when pushed to its limits. And they recognized that same potential lurking in every human. Even the young ones who hadn't yet learned what they were truly capable of. Around the cantina, other veterans began to drift away, each lost in their own memories of fighting alongside humanity. The Corvin mercenary left credits on his table and walked out without a word. The Thracian pilot followed, her scales still pale with remembered terror. One by one, they departed, carrying their stories and their scars back into the galaxy. Outside, the cantina, through the station's massive viewports, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Cold and distant, they bore witness to the endless patrol routes of human vessels, sleek destroyers, and massive dreadnoughts, carrying soldiers like Yunji, Min, Taeyong, and Haijin. Ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the galaxy needed them most. And in the deep black between the stars, potential enemies watched and waited, knowing that somewhere out there, humanity continued its relentless march across the cosmos. They had heard the stories too, whispered tales of what happened to those who stood in humanity's way. Most were smart enough to step aside. The few who weren't would learn, eventually. They always did. The end.